For the past 2 years, everything you thought you knew about the Black Sea has been completely turned on its head. The prevailing notion that this front was stagnant, balanced, or locked in a stalemate has completely crumbled. What we've witnessed is not a minor shift or small change. It's the quiet emergence of what can only be called the Odessa corridor, and with it, a devastating strategic defeat for the West. This isn't about daily headlines or battlefield maps. It's about the collapse of a fundamental assumption that shaped Western strategies from the start. Russia has made a move that goes far beyond simple tactics. The opening of the Odessa corridor represents a direct assault on the economic and military lifeblood of Ukraine. This isn't about capturing one city or threatening one port. It's the first stage of a strategy aimed directly at Ukraine's maritime sovereignty, and by extension, a challenge to the credibility of the West. What's happening now is not the result of improvisation or hasty decisions. It's the product of years of careful planning, strategic execution, and patience. Unlike the shallow analyses you often hear on television, this breakdown isn't about recycling talking points or emotional framing. What we're going to explore is grounded in military logic, geography, and geopolitical realities, everything you'd expect from a McGregor-style, no-nonsense approach. We'll take a deep dive into how Russia has managed to open this corridor, why NATO is responding with quiet panic, and why this move represents a nightmare scenario for the West. Russia has now, in effect, seized control of the sea lanes leading to Odessa, setting the stage for a new reality in the Black Sea. By doing so, it has secured a shipping corridor under its own terms and pushed its military influence deep into the western part of the sea. This is a game-changing moment, and it alters the entire strategic landscape. The key question now isn't how Russia accomplished this feat, it's why Odessa has always been the central goal. Odessa is not just another Ukrainian city, it is the country's last remaining viable deep-water port. Before the war, Odessa and its nearby ports were responsible for handling most of Ukraine's vital exports, particularly grain and steel. These weren't just symbolic exports, they are essential to the global economy. Ukrainian grain, for instance, helps feed large portions of the global south, while its steel plays a key role in industries far beyond Eastern Europe. The control of the northwestern Black Sea gives Russia the ability to stifle Ukraine's economic circulation. By opening the Odessa corridor, Moscow has gained much more than a military advantage. It now has the power to control, restrict, or permit global food flows. This elevates a regional war into a geopolitical game changer. With control of the Black Sea, Russia now holds leverage that extends far beyond Ukraine's borders. The power dynamics in the region have completely shifted. The pressure is no longer concentrated solely on Kyiv, but it now also targets NATO members like Romania, Bulgaria, and most importantly, Turkey. Turkey holds control over the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, two crucial choke points for naval passage. By taking control of Odessa, Russia has effectively placed itself in a dominant position in the Black Sea, a strategy that mirrors the tactics of historical choke point control, where a small, narrow space can be used to exert disproportionate political and economic influence. NATO's response has made this shift clear. Behind closed doors, emergency consultations have taken place and public rhetoric has shifted. No longer are NATO leaders speaking confidently of victory now, they're focused on stabilization. This change reveals a military truth NATO has long ignored. Russia still has the strategic depth to mobilize large forces and execute theater-level objectives. This is not the result of a single lucky move. It's the culmination of years of careful preparation, securing vital supply lines, gaining air dominance, and methodically weakening Ukraine's naval capabilities. The West unfortunately misread the situation. NATO viewed Ukraine through the lens of a modern European state, while Russia viewed it as a centuries-old security buffer on its southern frontier. And this shift in perspective has proven devastating. Russia has positioned itself where geography, military might, and economic leverage intersect, creating an indomitable advantage. But to truly understand why Odessa is so vital, we need to step back and look at the historical context. Its significance didn't just emerge in 2022 or even in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The roots of the struggle for Odessa run much deeper, stretching back centuries. To understand why Russia has always targeted this region, we must go back to the late 18th century and the imperial ambitions of the Russian Empire. In 1794, after defeating the Ottoman Empire, Empress Catherine the Great launched the Novorossiya Project, a geopolitical initiative that would reshape the Black Sea region. Odessa was founded as a strategic port to break Russia's long-standing vulnerability. The northern ports were icebound, limiting trade and naval access. Odessa was created to eliminate that limitation. From the moment it was founded, Odessa was engineered as an imperial gateway, one of the most vital commercial hubs in the Russian Empire. The city's role was clear: channel agricultural output from the fertile southern steppe onto global markets. Grain and wealth flowed through Odessa, turning it into a key element of Russia's geopolitical influence. It wasn't just a port, it was a naval anchor, a cornerstone of Russian power in the Black Sea, and a vital link in its long-term strategic thinking. The connection from Crimea to the Danube estuary was never just about territorial expansion, it was about securing Russia's position in the region. This strategic need for Odessa didn't fade after the Soviet Union's collapse. Every major conflict in Russia's history, from the Napoleonic Wars to the Crimean War and beyond, has been linked to the struggle for maritime dominance in this region. Russia's military strategy has long revolved around the control of Odessa and its surrounding coastline, and this continuity has been ignored by Western strategists. To the west, Odessa was just another Ukrainian port to be preserved, but for Russia it was unfinished business, a security gap that had to be closed. The Black Sea framework itself is built on this reality. The Montreux Convention, which governs naval access through the Turkish Straits, exists because the Black Sea is intrinsically tied to territorial control. Without Odessa, Russia's naval power in the region remains incomplete. The West, however, failed to grasp the strategic depth of Russia's objectives. NATO focused its attention almost entirely on the Eastern theater, particularly in Donbass, where the war seemed to be unfolding in conventional ways. Meanwhile, Russia used the time and space it had gained to methodically prepare the coastal theater for the shift we are seeing today. Western analysts were consumed with the Eastern Front, believing that holding the line there would suffice to thwart Russian advances. But this tactical mistake allowed Moscow to quietly build the conditions necessary for what's happening now, the opening of the Odessa corridor. This wasn't a sudden dramatic move, it was a slow, calculated process designed to weaken Ukraine's ability to defend its coastal regions without ever needing to invade Odessa directly. The strategy focused not on capturing territory, but on cutting off supply lines and creating logistical paralysis. Russia didn't need to storm Odessa. It only needed to isolate it and render it ineffective. The first phase of this strategy was logistical. Russia did not attempt immediate occupation, but instead targeted Ukraine's vital infrastructure, aiming to starve the region into submission. Key rail hubs, fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities, and port logistics nodes were hit repeatedly by long-range strikes using precision munitions like glide bombs and cruise missiles. These attacks didn't just damage infrastructure, they disrupted Ukraine's entire coastal defense network, crippling its ability to sustain military operations. The strikes on the Zatoka Bridge, a crucial rail link connecting Odessa to the rest of Ukraine, were particularly significant. This bridge was not just a symbolic target, it was the lifeline that connected Odessa to NATO's primary supply corridor through Romania. By neutralizing this bridge, Russia sent a clear signal the region was isolated, and large-scale military resupply from the West was no longer viable. As these strikes continued to accumulate, the strain on Ukraine's coastal defense infrastructure became unbearable. Odessa's ports, though still standing, could no longer sustain the high volume of military operations that they had previously supported. With the rail and road links degraded, Ukraine's ability to defend its coastline weakened dramatically. This wasn't a sudden collapse, it was the result of patient, systematic pressure applied over time. Russia was patient, knowing that once the supply lines were severed, Ukraine would have no choice but to stretch its resources thin, trying to defend an increasingly untenable position. At sea, the situation shifted just as decisively. Early in the war, Ukraine had achieved tactical successes with its naval drones, which forced Russia to adapt. But these victories were ultimately symbolic, and they didn't dismantle Russia's core naval strength. Moscow responded by adjusting its naval posture, fortifying its positions with advanced air defense systems, and expanding its long-range anti-ship and land attack missile capabilities. These adjustments didn't create a visible blockade marked by warships. Instead, they produced something far more powerful, a passive blockade. Commercial shipping could no longer operate safely in the Black Sea without facing unacceptable risks. Shipping insurance collapsed, and trade became untenable. The Black Sea effectively became a Russian-controlled firing zone. The final phase of Russia's strategy was to squeeze Ukraine from the land. Russian advances in the east, particularly around critical logistical corridors, forced Kyiv to commit its elite military units to the Donbass region, leaving the coastal defense zone vulnerable. Ukraine's most capable formations were consumed by the grueling battle in the east, while the southern coastal sector was left thinly manned and under-resourced. Politically, Kyiv couldn't afford to leave the Donbass exposed, so it sacrificed the coastal defense in order to hold its ground in the east. This was a strategic decision, but it was also a fatal flaw. Russia exploited this vulnerability perfectly. By the time Ukraine realized the full extent of the threat to Odessa, it was too late. The southern coastal sector had been hollowed out. The Odessa-Mykolaiv axis, which was vital for defense and logistics, was left weakened, unable to absorb sustained pressure. Any attempt to reinforce it would have exposed Ukraine's defenses elsewhere. Russia didn't need to capture the Odessa corridor, it only needed to control it. The pressure from the land, combined with the maritime and logistical squeeze, meant that Ukraine could no longer defend its coastline effectively. The strategic impact of this move is enormous. By gaining control over the Odessa corridor, Russia has secured a dominant position in the northwestern Black Sea, allowing it to dictate the terms of trade and access to the sea. Ukraine's maritime economy, once a vital asset, has been effectively neutralized. Odessa, once Ukraine's lifeline, has now become a liability. This move shifts the focus of the conflict away from the battlefield and into the realm of global geopolitics, where Russia holds significant leverage. What this development represents is not just a military defeat for Ukraine, but a direct challenge to NATO's credibility. The West had invested heavily in Ukraine's defense, but now we are seeing the limits of that support. NATO's strategy has been based on the assumption that the conflict would remain contained to Ukrainian territory and that Western support could tip the scales in Ukraine's favor. But Russia's actions have shattered that assumption. The Odessa corridor is not just a tactical loss, it's a strategic defeat for the West, and it forces NATO to confront its own vulnerabilities. The shift in the Black Sea has profound consequences not just for Ukraine, but for NATO and the wider world. The strategic implications of the Odessa corridor extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. What Russia has achieved is not just the capture of land or ports, it has gained control over an essential maritime route, one that affects global food security, trade, and energy flows. By controlling access to Odessa and, by extension, the Black Sea, Russia now has the ability to dictate economic terms across a vast region. This isn't just about geopolitical maneuvering, this is about reshaping global markets. Ukraine's ability to continue its exports, particularly of grain, has been severely restricted. Before the war, Ukraine's ports, with Odessa at the forefront, were responsible for a significant portion of global grain exports. The loss of this vital outlet not only impacts Ukraine's economy, but sends ripples across the world. Grain shortages could have a direct effect on food prices, particularly in the global south, where Ukrainian grain has long been a cornerstone of food security. The ripple effect doesn't stop there. As Russia gains control of these shipping lanes, it becomes a key player in the regulation of global food flows. Moscow can now influence not only regional economies, but also global markets, using this leverage to press its advantage in broader diplomatic and economic spheres. This shift represents a significant recalibration of power in the region. NATO, which has long been the dominant military alliance in Europe, now faces a direct challenge to its influence in the Black Sea. The alliance has been slow to respond to this new reality. While Western capitals focused on supporting Ukraine's land defenses, Russia quietly gained control of the region's maritime space. NATO's inaction in the face of Russia's increasing dominance over the Black Sea is not just a tactical failure, it is a strategic miscalculation. This misstep could have serious consequences for the alliance's cohesion and its ability to project power in the region. Romania and Bulgaria, NATO members with coastlines along the Black Sea, are now facing the very real prospect of a Russian-controlled maritime border. This isn't a hypothetical threat, it is happening right now. NATO's southeastern flank is being directly threatened, and the alliance must decide how to respond. Romania and Bulgaria are already calling for increased NATO presence in the region, and the pressure on NATO's leadership is mounting. With Russia controlling key maritime choke points, including the Bosporus, NATO must reckon with the reality that its traditional maritime dominance in the region is rapidly eroding. This shift in control also affects Turkey, which has historically balanced its NATO obligations with its relations with Russia. The new reality in the Black Sea forces Turkey into a precarious position, narrowing its room for maneuver and leaving it with limited options in dealing with both NATO and Russia. What Russia has done is not just an isolated military victory, it is a strategic shift that affects every country in the Black Sea region. The balance of power has fundamentally changed. NATO no longer has the luxury of ignoring the economic and maritime dimension of the conflict. Russia has not only gained a military advantage, but has effectively neutralized Ukraine's economic lifeline. By doing so, it has forced NATO to confront the limits of its support and the growing consequences of its failure to act decisively. The impact of this shift will be felt far beyond Europe. Global food security, trade routes, and energy flows are all now subject to Russian control. Moscow has gained the ability to dictate the terms of global commerce, and that power carries significant weight in the ongoing geopolitical struggle. What happens in the Black Sea will have ripple effects that reach across continents. The West's failure to prevent this shift is a stark reminder of the limitations of its power and influence in a rapidly changing global landscape. As the Odessa corridor becomes the focal point of the conflict, the stakes for NATO have escalated. The alliance must now decide how far it is willing to go to contest Russian control over the Black Sea. Any response carries risks, and NATO must weigh the potential for direct confrontation against the need to preserve its credibility and strategic objectives. The opening of the Odessa corridor is not a final victory for Russia, but it is a major strategic gain that has placed NATO in a difficult position. The alliance must now reassess its strategy, its goals, and its approach to the conflict. The failure to act decisively in the past has left NATO with few good options for moving forward. The next phase of the conflict will be defined not by land battles, but by the struggle for control over the Black Sea and its vital trade routes. Russia has already secured its maritime dominance in the region, and NATO must now decide whether it can effectively challenge that dominance or if it will allow Moscow to solidify its control. The economic, military, and geopolitical stakes have never been higher, and the choices made in the coming months will have long-lasting consequences for Europe and the world. As the Odessa corridor solidifies its importance, the shift in power dynamics is undeniable. Russia's control over the Black Sea now represents more than just military success. It's a strategic recalibration that places Moscow at the center of regional and global geopolitics. The West, particularly NATO, is now facing a critical dilemma. The alliance must reassess its strategy and its commitment to Ukraine. The realization is clear. Ukraine's maritime economy, once its greatest asset, is now under Russian control. This not only changes the battlefield, but reshapes the global economic landscape. Ukraine's maritime exports, which once flowed freely through Odessa, have been severely disrupted. Grain shipments, which are crucial for feeding millions in the global south, have ground to a halt. Without Odessa as a functional port, Ukraine's ability to feed the world's most vulnerable regions has been severely compromised. The economic consequences of this loss are staggering, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire global economy. Global food prices are likely to rise, and countries that depend on Ukrainian grain, such as those in Africa and the Middle East, will feel the impact. This has given Russia an economic lever that extends far beyond the borders of Ukraine. By controlling the Black Sea and its trade routes, Russia can exert influence over global food security, making it a critical player in international negotiations and policymaking. The West, particularly NATO, has been slow to respond to this emerging reality. While the alliance focused on supporting Ukraine's land defenses, it underestimated the importance of the Black Sea as the true center of gravity in this conflict. Russia understood this much sooner and acted accordingly. By gaining control over Odessa and the surrounding coastline, Russia has effectively sealed Ukraine's maritime access, leaving the country economically dependent on land routes that are increasingly vulnerable and inefficient. This has forced NATO to confront a difficult reality. Its strategy of limited intervention and slow support has not only failed to protect Ukraine's vital interests, but has created a situation where Russia now holds the upper hand. The Black Sea is no longer a peripheral concern. It is at the heart of the conflict, and the strategic importance of controlling this maritime space cannot be overstated. NATO's failure to effectively address Russia's dominance in the region has exposed the alliance's vulnerabilities. The alliance's traditional strategy of relying on air and land superiority is no longer sufficient to secure its interests in the Black Sea. The balance of power has shifted, and NATO must now consider how to respond to a Russian-controlled maritime zone that stretches across a significant portion of the Black Sea. NATO's challenge is not just about military power, it's about industrial capacity and political will. Modern warfare, particularly at this scale, is not decided solely by battlefield engagements. It is determined by the ability to sustain prolonged military output, supply chains, and industrial mobilization. Russia has proven its capacity to produce weapons at a scale that NATO cannot match. While the West has relied on expensive, specialized systems, Russia has focused on volume and persistence. This industrial imbalance has been decisive in the conflict, allowing Russia to maintain constant pressure on Ukraine and the Black Sea region. The real question now is how NATO will respond to this new reality. The alliance's leadership has been hesitant to escalate the conflict, particularly when it comes to direct military engagement. However, Russia's growing dominance in the Black Sea has forced NATO to confront a difficult choice. How far is the alliance willing to go to push back against Russia's maritime power? Any response carries significant risks, and NATO's options are limited. The alliance must now confront the reality that its strategy of restrained support and incremental intervention has failed to secure its objectives in the Black Sea. The most likely response from NATO will be to bolster its defenses in the region, particularly in Romania and Bulgaria, which now face a Russian-controlled maritime border. NATO's presence in the Black Sea will likely increase, but this will come with significant costs. The alliance will need to commit more resources to defend its southeastern flank, and the pressure on NATO's defense industries will only grow. However, NATO's response will be constrained by the fact that it cannot match Russia's industrial output, and it cannot escalate the conflict without risking direct confrontation with Russia. The Black Sea is now the front line of the conflict, and the stakes have never been higher. Russia's control over the Odessa corridor has fundamentally changed the strategic calculus in the region. NATO's credibility is on the line, and the alliance must decide whether it is willing to commit the resources and political will necessary to challenge Russia's maritime dominance. The next phase of the conflict will not be defined by land battles, but by the struggle for control over the Black Sea. If NATO does not act decisively, Russia will continue to solidify its control, and the balance of power in Europe will shift permanently. The implications of this shift are not limited to Ukraine or NATO. The opening of the Odessa corridor has wider geopolitical ramifications that will be felt across the world. As Russia gains more control over global trade and food security, it will increase its influence on the international stage. The Black Sea, once a peripheral theater of conflict, has become the epicenter of a new geopolitical struggle. The choices made in the coming months will shape the future of European security and the global balance of power for generations to come. As Russia consolidates its control over the Odessa corridor, the consequences are becoming more apparent, not only for Ukraine, but for the broader global order. The strategic shift in the Black Sea is already beginning to reshape regional security, economic flows, and political alignments. Ukraine, once poised to capitalize on its maritime economy, now finds itself severely constrained its most critical economic asset, neutralized. The full extent of the consequences for Ukraine is still unfolding, but the immediate impact is clear. Odessa's loss has gutted the country's maritime trade and weakened its ability to support its military efforts. The question now isn't just about Ukraine's territorial integrity, it's about its survival as an economically viable state in a new geopolitical order. The Black Sea, once a critical buffer zone between Russia and NATO, has transformed into a contested space where Russia now dominates. Romania, Bulgaria, and even Turkey, which has traditionally held a delicate balance between NATO and Russia, now find themselves on the front line of this new strategic reality. Russia's control over the Black Sea and its ability to regulate trade and military access has shifted the regional balance of power. NATO, already stretched thin by its commitments in Ukraine and other regions, now faces the prospect of a long-term standoff in the Black Sea, with Russia holding significant leverage over key maritime choke points. This is a scenario NATO has long sought to avoid, but it is one that has become increasingly inevitable as Russia continues to fortify its position in the region. The alliance's response, while rhetorically firm, has been slow and hesitant. NATO's failure to recognize the strategic importance of the Black Sea early on has left the alliance struggling to contain Russia's growing influence. In the absence of a clear and decisive military response, NATO is forced to rely on a strategy of containment, but this approach comes with its own set of risks. The longer Russia holds its dominance in the region, the more difficult it will become for NATO to reverse this trend without escalating the conflict to dangerous levels. The global consequences of this shift are already being felt. Ukraine's loss of Odessa has not only disrupted the country's economy, but has also sent shockwaves through global markets. The Black Sea is a crucial maritime route for the transport of goods, particularly agricultural exports like Ukrainian grain. With Russia now controlling access to this vital corridor, global food security is at risk. The disruption of Ukrainian grain exports will have far-reaching effects, particularly for countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, which rely heavily on Ukrainian agriculture. Russia, with its newfound leverage, can now dictate the terms of food supply, using it as a powerful geopolitical tool. In addition to food security, energy flows are also at risk. The Black Sea is a key transit route for oil and gas shipments to Europe, and Russia's control over this corridor gives it the ability to regulate these flows as well. The implications for European energy security are significant, particularly as the continent continues to grapple with the fallout from the ongoing energy crisis exacerbated by the war. NATO's reliance on the Black Sea for energy transportation has been exposed as a critical vulnerability, and Russia is well positioned to exploit this weakness. The opening of the Odessa corridor represents a turning point in the war, but it is also a signal of the broader shifts occurring in global geopolitics. The West's inability to prevent Russia's advance in the Black Sea has laid bare the limitations of NATO's strategy and the alliance's capacity to counter Russian influence in the region. This failure to act decisively in the face of Russia's growing maritime power will have lasting repercussions for the credibility of NATO and its deterrence capabilities. The alliance is now faced with a difficult question: how far is it willing to go to confront Russia in the Black Sea? And what are the risks of escalating the conflict to a level that could have catastrophic consequences for global security? The strategic challenges that NATO faces in the Black Sea are not just military, they are also industrial and economic. Modern warfare at this scale is determined not only by battlefield victories, but by the ability to sustain military production, supply chains, and technological superiority. Russia's industrial mobilization has outpaced NATO's ability to sustain its military efforts, and this imbalance has been a decisive factor in the opening of the Odessa corridor. While the West has been slow to mobilize its industrial base, Russia has been able to produce weapons, drones, and missiles at a pace that NATO has struggled to match. This has allowed Russia to maintain constant pressure on Ukraine while NATO's resources have been stretched thin. The industrial imbalance between Russia and NATO is not just a factor of military production, it is also a reflection of broader geopolitical realities. Russia has been able to leverage its industrial capacity and political will to maintain a sustained military campaign, while NATO has been hampered by political hesitation and bureaucratic inefficiencies. This imbalance has allowed Russia to establish its dominance in the Black Sea and NATO's failure to match this level of industrial mobilization has exposed the alliance's vulnerabilities. As Russia moves forward, the focus will shift from the immediate battlefield to the long-term implications of its strategic success in the Black Sea. The opening of the Odessa corridor is not the end of the conflict. It is the beginning of a new phase in the war, one that will have far-reaching consequences for regional security, global markets, and the future of NATO. The West must now reckon with the fact that its strategy has failed to contain Russia's ambitions, and it must decide how to respond to a growing geopolitical challenge that threatens not only Ukraine, but the stability of Europe and the wider world. The future of the Black Sea is now in Russia's hands. The West must decide whether it is willing to confront this reality head-on, or whether it will accept a new strategic order that shifts the balance of power in the region. The decisions made in the coming months will shape the future of European security and the global balance of power for years to come.